Hi everyone, in today's video we're going to study the well-known Evergreen game. As its name suggests, this is a game that even today, over 170 years after it was played, we can use it as a model game, in this case to illustrate the importance of a safe king and the power of development and initiative. So playing as white we have the German master Adolf Andersen, who was a leading player of the time, and he was playing against another fairly strong German player. And Anderson started with the move e4, and after e5 and knight to f3, black played knight to c6, and after bishop c4 and bishop to c5 we have an Italian game. And Anderson was known for being a very aggressive player, and already on the fourth move he played a very interesting gambit, which is called the Evans gambit, by going b4. This might look like a crazy move, but even nowadays, this gambit is played occasionally, so I would say that it is fairly sound, at least to be played in a few games. So here black took the pawn on b4, and now we'll see the main idea that white has after taking the pawn. This gambit has been studied a lot, and it is fairly complicated. If you ever face this position against an experienced opponent, I just want to mention that you may even consider ignoring this pawn and going bishop to b6. This is a fairly solid option. Even former world champion Magnus Carlsen has played this move, so this is quite an interesting way to avoid the main lines of the gambit. So here we simply keep the bishop on this very strong diagonal. Now we just plan to develop with knight to f6 or d6, so black is doing fine in these positions. Here white might try going a4 in order to try to trap the bishop by going a5, but here we can simply play the move a6 and then continue with our main plan. But in any case, black went for the main line and captured with the bishop. And here white's main idea is to follow up with the move c3. And black already has to be a bit careful. The main idea of the move c3 is to go d4, so going back to c5 here would allow d4 again, attacking the bishop. And white wants to get this very strong center. That's why the move c3 and d4 prepares to recapture with the pawn on c3 if black takes on d4. So here black played the move bishop to a5, which is a better move. And the main idea is that after d4, now black can capture on d4. And now this pawn on c3 is pinned. But actually this is the way on which the game continued, because white has other ideas. Besides trying to gain a strong center, white wants to quickly develop. Now we see that after d4, the bishop can develop easily, or at least it's controlling the g5 square. And another important idea in the Evans gambit for white is that the queen can develop to b3, and then white can put a lot of pressure on f7. So the position, even though black should be doing fine with correct play, it is actually quite dangerous for black. So here white castled. Now that the pawn on c3 is not pinned anymore, there might be an idea to recapture on d4. And here black played a move which is fairly interesting, which is the move d3. Black can continue developing, which is normally the logical way to continue, but white has ideas to attack. For example, after knight g to e7, knight to g5 is an interesting idea, already putting pressure on f7, queen to h5 might follow up if black castles, so the position remains dangerous for black. And after knight to f6, another important idea for white here is to go bishop to a3, trying to prevent black from castling, and now white has ideas to go e5 as well, and taking this pawn e4 is pretty much suicidal. After rook to e1, now this knight is pinned, and black's king is still on the center, so this position is already quite bad for black. So the move d3 plans to give a pawn back, and here white correctly continued with the main idea, which is to attack. White doesn't want to capture the pawn. Taking with the bishop would worsen the bishop, which is doing a great job on c4, and taking with the queen would allow black to continue developing. For example, after knight g to e7, if white goes knight to g5, black might even have ideas to go knight to e5, attacking the queen and the bishop. Black is happy to trade pieces in this position. So white doesn't care about one pawn or two pawns, white just wants to attack. So queen to b3 is very sharp, going for the f7 pawn. Now black has to be careful. Black defended with the queen to f6. If the queen goes to e7, here white can go e5 and then follow up with bishop to a3, attacking the queen. So queen to f6 is a better move. Normally the f6 square is good for the knight, but in this particular position black has to play some unnatural moves to hold the position. And here white continued with the move e5, attacking the queen. Black continued defending f7 with queen to g6. Taking on e5 again, the greedy approach doesn't work here. after rook to e1, this knight is pinned, and black is just losing material, for example after d6. Here white can even go for the simple knight takes e5, and after pawn takes, queen to b5, will fork the king and the bishop, and white is winning material. So black correctly defends with queen to g6, and here Andersen went for rook to e1, again ignoring the material. I just want to mention that here, after rook to d1, white can get a pawn back, and the position should be fairly balanced. For example, after knight g to e7, bishop takes, and queen to h5, white has fairly good compensation for the pawn. But Andersen continued playing without caring about pawns, just trying to attack, and went rook to e1. Black developed the knight finally with knight g to e7, and after bishop to a3. This is a very surprising moment. In this position, it is really hard for me to understand why black didn't castle. The king on e8 is definitely not safe. Maybe black, who has been under a lot of pressure for many moves, simply wanted to attack, but it is very important to attack whenever you have a safe king. So here the idea of b5 played by black didn't work well. But here, instead, black should have castled and tried to finish his development. Here white can get a pawn back, for example with rook to e3. But black's main idea now is to develop the bishop on c8 and connect rooks. So here black can move the d-pawn to d6 or even to d5. And now the bishop will develop. d5 even invites white to go wrong. For example, after bishop takes and knight takes. Even though white is getting some material back, now it is black the one who is developing. After rook to d8, then the bishop will develop, and black is even the one having the better position here. But after d5, white can take en passant, and after pawn takes and bishop takes, white is getting the material back. This pawn on d6 might even fall, but the main point is that now black is now finally fully developing, and the position remains balanced. But b5 in this position simply doesn't work. White simply took the pawn, and even though rook to b8 attacks the queen, this rook on b8 will not do a lot. And in fact, after queen to a4, now black has another problem. In this position, black cannot castle, because now there's a problem with the bishop on a5. After bishop takes and knight takes, this bishop will fall. That's why black moved the bishop to b6, but now I don't really understand the point of bringing a rook to b8 with a bishop on b6. The rook is doing nothing. So now white simply developed, and now black had the final opportunity to castle, which black didn't go for. So here black should have castled and then continue with this idea of d5. At least black is in the game here, because after bishop to b7 and knight to e4, now white is getting the material back, plus white is also having a much better position. This pawn e5 is really like a bone in black's throat. That's why this idea of going d6 or d5 was very important, which black cannot go for anymore, because now the knight is also eyeing the d6 square. So black's position is already quite bad. In fact, here black played the move queen to f5, which is quite hard to understand. But if black had castled here, now after bishop takes, there's just way too many threats. Knight to f6, giving a check with a discovered attack on the queen is very strong. And the queen is really misplaced on the king side. For example, after queen to h5, white can simply attack the queen with knight to g3. The queen doesn't have a lot of squares. The queen on a4 is also eyeing the king side. And just to give you a sample line, after queen to h6, bishop to c1, the queen is just moving all the time. For example, after queen to e6 and knight to g5, white attacks the queen and the h7 square, so black's position collapses. But after queen to f5 and bishop takes, white still gets the idea of going knight to f6 or even knight to d6, which gives a check, attacking the queen. That's why black went queen to h5. And now in this position, which is already desperate for black, here white could have continued with pretty much any move. I like rook a to d1, just bringing the last passive piece. The rook on the d file is very well placed. Or even the move knight to d6. Knight to f6 was played in the game, but knight to d6 is, in my view, a lot more natural. The point is that white gives a check, and if pawn takes and pawn takes, white simply gets the piece back, because the knight on e7 is pinned. Black doesn't get any counterplay, and if black decides to castle, after pawn takes, white gets this very strong pawn on e7, in addition to being a pawn up. But if white hadn't played the move knight to f6, we would probably not be analyzing this game, because after knight to f6 we'll get a very nice finish. So here white gave a check, also attacking the queen, that's why black has to capture the knight. And after pawn takes, now white will get the knight back, but on the other hand, this allowed black to activate the rook by going rook to g8. So here white has to be very careful. For example, taking the knight here wouldn't work because black can capture on f3 with the queen. The pawn on g2 is now pinned. So here white finally went for this idea of activating the rook by going rook a to d1, and this invites black to play a very natural move, which is the move queen takes f3, just grabbing more material. I just want to mention that in this very crazy position, black could have continued the game with queen to h3, planning to capture on g2, but also keeping an eye on the d7 pawn, which as we'll see is critical for black to hold the position. So in this crazy position, white could have defended on g2, and we just get a very irrational position. Despite being a piece up, this knight cannot move, so we get a very extremely complicated position, but at least for black, the game is not over. But here black played the very natural move, queen takes f3, just grabbing another piece, and black doesn't even have one big threat, but two. So here, taking on g2 with the queen, giving a checkmate, is a big threat, but also taking on f2. That's why here white is now in time to play defensive moves like g3. So the combination that Anderson saw in advance is just mind-blowing. White simply has to play attacking moves all the time, otherwise the game is just going to be over. So white started with the move rook takes e7, giving a check. White captured with the knight, which as we'll see will lead to a very fantastic finish, but let's see other very interesting lines. If white goes king to f8, after rook to e3, we get a discover check, and white will pick up the queen. And after king to d8, we'll see another important idea. White can sacrifice on d7, rook takes d7. If black captures on d7, we'll see a similar idea in the game. White can go bishop to f5. Or if black goes king to c8, here there's a very pretty continuation. Here white can go rook to d8. Even though the rook can be captured in 3 different ways, white is just winning the game. After king takes, bishop to e2, gives a check, can capture the queen. If rook takes, now that the g2 pawn is not pinned, white simply captures the queen. Or after knight takes, white sacrifices again on d7 by going queen to d7, and after king takes and bishop to f5, white forces a checkmate. We get a double check, so black has to move the king. If the king goes to e8 or to c6, bishop to d7, white delivers a very pretty checkmate. So that's why black decided to capture the rook by going knight takes e7, and white seems to run out of checks, but after seeing the previous lines, you might suspect that white's continuation is to sacrifice on d7, so white captured on d7, now giving the queen. If the king goes to f8, queen takes e7 is a checkmate, that's why black has to capture, and now we get a very similar idea. Bishop to f5, the only way to continue and save the game, otherwise white is just a lot of material down and getting checkmated. But after this double check, we'll get a very similar checkmate. If the king goes to c6, bishop to d7 is a checkmate, or after king to e8, bishop to d7 is a checkmate after bishop takes e7, if the king goes to d8 or to f8. So after king to f8, which was played in the game, bishop takes, white gives this very pretty checkmate with a pawn and 2 bishops. So I hope that you enjoyed this very nice attacking game. If you want to see another very old but still relevant attacking game, you might want to check this video on the right.